When everyone doubts the power of knowledge, a young mind defies the impossible and forever changes the way the world sees talent. The gray sky of New York City was dawning when Maria Parker woke up, as she did every day at 5 in the morning. The small apartment in the South Bronx, on the outskirts of the city, was still silent. Maria watched her daughter sleeping and smiled with her heart tight with pride. Isabel, at 13 years old, was her greatest achievement, her reason for waking up every day and facing the 3 buses to reach the business center where she worked as a cleaner. "Izzy, honey, wake up. It's time," whispered Maria, adjusting the curly hair of the girl. Isabel opened her eyes slowly, revealing a deep and determined look that always surprised those who encountered it. "Good morning, Mum," replied the girl, stretching. "Are you going to be late again today?" "Yes, my flower. There's an important meeting in that new building, and the cleaning team needs to leave everything impeccable." Maria adjusted her light blue uniform with the cleaning company logo. "But I left food ready in the fridge, just heat it up." While her mother prepared a simple breakfast, Isabel organized her backpack. Among the notebooks from the public school where she studied, there were 3 books from the local library, one on Russian grammar, another on French idiomatic expressions, and an Arabic dictionary. Nobody except her mother knew about the secret passion she had cultivated for languages since she was 7. "Mum, I'm going to stop by the library after school. Mrs. Robinson said new German materials arrived," commented Isabel, biting a piece of bread. Maria smiled, mixing admiration and concern. "Don't you want to play a bit with girls your age? Julie from next door is always inviting you to play volleyball at the court." Isabel shrugged. "I don't really fit in with them, Mum. I prefer staying at the library. It's more interesting." In truth, Isabel had tried to approach her classmates several times, but always felt out of place. When she mentioned her passion for languages, she received looks of bewilderment, or worse, mockery. The weird polyglot was what they called her behind her back. After saying goodbye to her mother at the bus stop, Isabel headed to school. Regular classes were merely an interval between her true moments of learning. Physics, math, English. She absorbed everything easily, but without the enthusiasm she reserved for her linguistic studies. At the end of the afternoon, as promised, she went to the South Bronx Public Library, a modest but welcoming building that had become her second home. Upon entering, she was greeted by the gentle smile of Mrs. Robinson, the 60-year-old librarian who had been the first to notice the girl's exceptional ability. "Isabel, I was waiting for you. The material I told you about arrived," said the lady, handing her a worn book. "It's a German conversation manual. It was donated by a retired professor." Isabel's eyes lit up as she leafed through the yellowed pages. "Thank you, Mrs. Robinson. This is exactly what I needed to better understand the sentence structure. You know, Isabel, in all my years as a librarian, I've never seen anyone with your ability. How many languages do you speak now?" "Depends on what you consider speaking," replied Isabel shyly. "I can communicate well in 9, but I understand basics of 6 more. I'm still learning." Mrs. Robinson shook her head, impressed. "And all this on your own, just with books and those meetings with the NGO volunteers?" "The meetings with immigrants are the best," confessed Isabel. "When I speak with Mr. Hakim in Arabic or with Mrs. Yuki in Japanese, they get so happy. It's like I can bring a little piece of their home back, you know." The Open Borders NGO, located a few blocks from the library, offered free language classes taught by immigrants and refugees. Isabel had started attending 2 years ago, initially just observing. Gradually, her impressive ease in absorbing new languages caught the attention of the volunteer teachers, who began offering her additional materials and personalized conversation. Isabel settled at her usual table in the corner of the library and opened the German manual. Next to it, she arranged a notebook where she made meticulous notes with color systems for different grammatical rules. It was her personal method, developed after realizing that visual associations accelerated her learning. Hours passed and the library began to empty. Isabel's cell phone vibrated, a message from her mother informing her that she would arrive even later due to an unexpected situation at work. The girl sighed, already accustomed to Maria's exhausting routine. She packed her materials in her backpack and prepared to leave when Mrs. Robinson called her. "Isabel, I almost forgot. I found this in the newspaper today. I thought it might interest you." The librarian handed her a newspaper clipping with the headline, "Technology Company Announces Scholarship Program for Extraordinary Talents." Isabel read the news with growing interest. Winter Tech, one of the largest technology companies in the country, was launching a national scholarship program for young talents in various areas. Those selected would receive full scholarships to excellent private schools, specialized mentoring, and access to international opportunities. It's an open competition for young people from 12 to 18 years old, explained Mrs. Robinson. Registrations close next week. I thought that maybe you could try. Isabel felt her heart race. She had never considered her linguistic abilities as something that could open doors for her. They were just her secret passion, her refuge. But I don't even know how to program or create apps. It's a technology company, she argued. Read more carefully, dear. They're looking for talents in various areas, including linguistics and international communication, with your ability with languages. That night, Isabel waited for her mother to get home, the newspaper clipping burning in her backpack like an ember. When Maria finally entered, exhausted after almost 14 hours of work, the girl hesitated to mention the subject. "Mom, I found something today, a scholarship program." Maria, who was taking off her painful shoes, looked at her daughter with curiosity. Isabel extended the clipping, explaining about the opportunity. As she spoke, she noticed her mother's expression change. There was pride, hope, but also apprehension. "Izzy, that's wonderful. But this Winter Tech, it's that Calvin Winter's company, isn't it?" Maria knew that name well. She regularly cleaned the meeting room where he conducted meetings with executives. He has a reputation for being, well, not a very humble person. But it wouldn't be him who would evaluate, Mum. It must be a team, professors. Maria looked deeply into her daughter's eyes, recognizing the mixture of hope and fear that she tried to hide. "You deserve all the opportunities in the world, my daughter. If you want to try, let's go for it." That night, while her mother slept, Isabel filled out the online application form using the old computer they had bought in installments. In area of talent, she hesitated before writing, "Linguistics, mastery of multiple languages." In the observations field, she added, "Self-taught in 15 languages, including Arabic, Mandarin, Russian, and Japanese." As she clicked "Submit," she did not imagine that that simple gesture would change her life forever, nor that her name would soon be on the lips of the entire country, transforming not only her destiny, but also that of one of the most powerful men in America. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give it a like. Tell us what city you're watching us from. We continue. 3 weeks passed since Isabel's application to the Winter Tech Scholarship Program. The girl had almost forgotten about it, immersed in her studies of Hungarian, the 16th language she had decided to explore. That's when the email arrived, on a Thursday afternoon, while she was studying at the library. "Congratulations, you have been selected for the final phase of the Winter Tech Talents Program." Isabel read the message 3 times, incredulous. According to the email, she and 40 other finalists would participate in a collective interview at the company headquarters in the financial heart of New York City. The date was set for 10 days from then. "I can't believe it, Mrs. Robinson. They called me," she exclaimed, showing her cell phone to the librarian. "I knew it. How could they not call someone with your talent?" The lady hugged Isabel, genuinely happy. "We need to tell your mother." That night, when giving the news to Maria, Isabel saw in her mother's eyes a mixture of pride and concern. "I'm so proud of you, my daughter." Maria held Isabel's hands. "But that place, those people, it's a completely different world from ours." "What do you mean, Mum?" Maria sighed, carefully choosing her words. "Winter Tech is on Wall Street, in the tallest all-glass building. I clean offices there sometimes. People wear expensive clothes, talk about international trips like they're talking about going to the grocery store. I'm afraid they won't see how special you are." Isabel hugged her mother. "Don't worry, I'll show my talent, not my wardrobe." In the following days, Isabel prepared meticulously. She practiced each of the languages she mastered, reviewed specific cultural expressions, researched about Winter Tech and its founder, Calvin Winters. The information she found about him was intimidating. Graduated from Stanford, son of bankers, had built a technological empire by age 35. In interviews, he always emphasized that exceptional talent is rare and should be nurtured in environments of excellence. a philosophy that guided his scholarship program. On the eve of the interview, Isabel received an unexpected message on the Open Borders NGO app. It was from Hakim, the volunteer Arabic teacher, a Syrian refugee who had been living in America for 5 years. "I heard about your selection for the Winter Tech program. We are all very proud. Remember, your voice carries not just words but entire cultures. Show them the power of that." That message gave Isabel an idea. Instead of just demonstrating vocabulary and grammar, she would talk about the cultures behind the languages, the human stories that each language carried. On the morning of the interview, Isabel wore the best she had: her clean school uniform, simple but well-polished shoes, and her curly hair tied in an organized bun. Maria couldn't accompany her. She couldn't get time off work, but she prepared a special snack and gave her daughter money for the taxi, saved over weeks. "You're going to shine, my star," she said, adjusting the collar of her daughter's shirt. "No matter the outcome, you're already a winner to me." The Winter Tech building was exactly as her mother had described, a tower of glass and steel that seemed to touch the sky, reflecting the morning sun like a giant mirror. In the imposing lobby with marble flooring and an artificial waterfall, Isabel felt tiny. She presented the invitation email at the reception and received a visitor badge. "40th floor Horizon Conference Room," informed the receptionist without raising her eyes. In the elevator, Isabel met other candidates. Unlike her, they wore designer clothes, carried the latest tablets and notebooks, chatted about renowned private schools they attended. A girl of approximately her age, with perfectly straight hair and impeccably manicured nails, looked her up and down. "Are you a candidate too?" she asked, her tone of voice mixing surprise and condescension. "Yes," replied Isabel simply. "In which area?" "I'm a finalist in app development. I created an app that already has 5,000 downloads," boasted the girl. "Linguistics," replied Isabel. "Languages." "Oh," replied the other, disinterested. "Must be for that corporate social responsibility initiative they have." Isabel took a deep breath, controlling the impulse to respond. She remembered Hakim's words. Her voice carried entire cultures. She wouldn't waste that on responses to superficial provocations. The Horizon Conference Room lived up to its name. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of New York City. In the center, a circular stage with microphones and a large screen. Around it, chairs arranged in a semicircle for an audience that included evaluators, company executives, and some journalists invited to cover the event. The candidates were divided by talent areas. Isabel sat with 3 other young people in the Linguistics and International Communication section, all students from expensive bilingual schools, as she discovered during the initial presentations. Finally, after 2 hours of waiting, Calvin Winters arrived. The CEO entered the room with the confidence of someone who owns the world. Tall, elegantly dressed in a tailored Italian suit, he greeted some executives and sat in the first row, crossing his legs with studied nonchalance. "Welcome to the final phase of the Winter Tech Talents program," announced a middle-aged woman, the Human Resources Director. "Today, each candidate will have 5 minutes to demonstrate their exceptional talent. Our evaluators, specialists in each area, will assign scores. The winners will be announced at the end of the day." The presentations began. Young prodigies in programming, mathematics, design, and sciences took the stage, displaying truly impressive skills. The audience applauded politely after each demonstration, while the evaluators made detailed notes. In the linguistics section, the first candidate, a boy from an international bilingual school, impressed everyone by conversing fluently in English, French, and Spanish with the evaluators. The second demonstrated advanced mastery of Japanese and Mandarin in addition to native English. The third spoke about literary translation, reciting poems in 4 different languages. Then it was Isabel's turn. "Our next candidate is Isabel Parker, 13 years old, from Theodore Roosevelt Public High School," announced the presenter, hesitating slightly when mentioning the public school. A murmur ran through the room. Calvin Winters, who had been discreetly consulting his cell phone during some presentations, raised his eyes with curiosity. He saw a simple girl in a school uniform, timidly climbing onto the stage. He smiled indulgently, preparing himself for what he imagined would be a modest presentation. "Good afternoon," began Isabel, her voice initially trembling. My name is Isabel Parker, and I am self-taught in languages. How many languages do you speak, dear? Asked an evaluator, with a gentle smile that barely disguised the condescending tone. Isabel took a deep breath, remembering all those who believed in her. Her mother, Mrs. Robinson, Hakim, and the other immigrant teachers. Currently, I can communicate in 15 languages, she replied, with a sudden calmness that surprised even herself. A muffled laugh echoed in the back of the room. Calvin Winters leaned towards an executive at his side and whispered something that made them both smile with irony. 15 languages? Repeated the main evaluator, a university professor of linguistics. That's quite impressive, if true. Could you give us a demonstration? Isabel nodded, feeling a warmth rise up her neck. She was used to studying alone or in small groups at the NGO. She had never presented to such an intimidating audience. I'll begin with a brief presentation in some of these languages, she said, but I'd like to show not just words, but what I've learned about the cultures that each language represents. And then, to everyone's surprise, including her own, Isabel began to speak. Her voice, initially hesitant, gained strength as the words flowed naturally, like a river that finally finds the sea. Bonjour à tous, began Isabelle in perfect French. Je m'appelle Isabelle et j'ai appris le français en lisant Victor Hugo et Camus à la bibliothèque municipale. Without pausing to breathe, she continued in German. In Deutschland sagt man, dass eine neue Sprache wie ein neues Fenster ist, das sich zu einer neuen Welt öffnet. In Germany, they say that a new language is like a new window that opens to a new world. Silence began to settle in the room as Isabel smoothly transitioned to Italian, then to Russian, each language flowing into the next like waters from different rivers meeting in the same ocean. These weren't just memorized words or rehearsed phrases. She explained complex concepts, made cultural observations, cited literature. On the faces of the evaluators, the initial condescension gave way to astonishment. The university professor dropped his pen, unable to continue taking notes, hypnotized by the demonstration. In Arabic, she continued, transitioning to the language she had learned with Hakim, there is a proverb that says, when you learn the language of a people, you protect yourself from their wickedness. But I prefer to think that when we learn a language, we gain access not just to the words, but to the soul of a culture. By this point, even the candidates who had previously looked at her with disdain watched open-mouthed. The app girl with 5,000 downloads had wide eyes, unable to hide her surprise. Calvin Winters, who initially smiled with irony, now leaned forward, his forehead furrowed in concentration. When Isabel began speaking in Mandarin, explaining nuances of Confucian philosophy that she had learned from library texts, he turned to the HR director at his side. Is this real? Has anyone verified her background? He whispered, loud enough for nearby people to hear. Sir, all applications go through verification, replied the woman, equally perplexed. She really did indicate knowledge of multiple languages, but we never imagined. Meanwhile, Isabel moved on to Japanese, then to Hebrew, each transition more fluid than the previous one. Her initial nervousness had completely disappeared, replaced by the confidence she felt when she lost herself among books and conversations at the Open Borders NGO. In Swahili, she continued, moving to the African language, there is a word Ubuntu, which means I am because we are. I learned this language from Mrs. Amara, a refugee from Kenya, who gives volunteer classes on Saturday afternoons. She taught me that each language carries not just grammar and vocabulary, but entire ways of seeing the world. Gradually, Isabel realized that the 5 minutes allocated for her presentation had already extended to almost 15, but no one dared to interrupt her. She also demonstrated fluency in Spanish, European Portuguese, pointing out subtle differences with Brazilian, British and American English, highlighting cultural variations, Dutch, modern Greek, and finally, the Hungarian she had recently begun to study. When she finally concluded saying, "Thank you for your attention" in American English, a dense silence hung over the room for 3, 4, 5 seconds, a vacuum of disbelief that preceded the storm. It was the university professor who broke the silence, rising from his chair. In 30 years evaluating linguistic competence, I've never, his voice failed, never witnessed anything remotely similar. The applause began timid, then grew in intensity, until they transformed into a true ovation. People who minutes before had barely noticed the presence of the girl in a school uniform now stood up, applauding with genuine amazement and admiration. Everyone, except Calvin Winters. The CEO remained seated, his fingers drumming on the arm of the chair, his eyes fixed on Isabel with an indecipherable expression. "Impressive, no doubt," he finally said, his voice cutting through the applause that was beginning to diminish. "But I'm curious. How did a public school student from the South Bronx acquire such knowledge? Certainly not in your school's language labs." The question, loaded with barely disguised skepticism, made the room fall silent again. Eyes turned to Isabel, some with genuine curiosity, others reflecting the same distrust as Calvin. Isabel took a deep breath before responding, "You're right, not in school. My school barely has a science lab, let alone language labs." Her voice was calm, without resentment. "I learned using the free resources of the local library in my neighborhood, with free cell phone apps with online videos, and mainly with the volunteer teachers from the Open Borders NGO, immigrants and refugees who share their native languages." "And who paid for these resources? Any sponsors? Any other company?" insisted Calvin, as if looking for an explanation that would fit his worldview. "No one, sir. The library is public, the apps are free, and the NGO teachers are volunteers. My mother—" Isabel hesitated briefly. "My mother works as a cleaner. We can't afford private classes or language schools." A murmur ran through the room. A journalist in the back, who until then had just been observing, began making frantic notes in her notebook. Calvin Winters stood up, adjusting his expensive jacket in a gesture that betrayed his discomfort. "Well, it's certainly an inspiring story," he said, a polite smile masking his incredulity. "I thank you for your presentation, Miss Parker. Our evaluators will carefully consider all candidates." And with that he made a gesture for the presenter to call the next candidate, clearly wishing to end that disconcerting moment. But something unexpected happened. One of the evaluators, an older man with grey hair who hadn't spoken until then, raised his hand. "If I may, Mr. Winters, I'd like to ask a few more questions to the candidate." Calvin hesitated, but nodded reluctantly. The man, who introduced himself as Dr. Matthews, Professor Emeritus of Comparative Linguistics, addressed Isabel. "Young lady, your demonstration was extraordinary, but I'm curious, you mentioned that you learned Arabic with a volunteer teacher. Could you tell us something specific about the structure of that language that differentiates it from the others, you know?" Isabel's eyes lit up with the opportunity to talk about something she deeply loved. "Arabic has a fascinating trilateral root system," she explained, going into linguistic details that only a true scholar would understand. She explained how related words derive from the same three consonants, illustrating with examples that demonstrated not just knowledge, but deep understanding of the language's structure. Dr. Matthews nodded, visibly impressed, and asked similar questions about other languages. The honorifics in Japanese, the grammatical cases of Russian, the tones of Mandarin. With each answer, it became more evident that Isabel's knowledge was genuine and profound. The journalist in the back of the room was discreetly filming with her cell phone. Initially, she had intended just a few images to illustrate her article about the scholarship program, but now she was capturing something much more valuable. The moment when a 13-year-old girl from the outskirts challenged all expectations in one of the most elitist environments in New York City. When Dr. Matthews finally expressed satisfaction, another silence took over the room, different from the first, loaded not with incredulity but with reverence. The story was no longer about a girl who spoke many languages, but about an extraordinary talent that had flourished in the most unlikely circumstances. "I appreciate the questions, Dr. Matthews," said Isabel, with a maturity that surprised everyone. "I hope I've demonstrated not just my knowledge, but my passion for languages and cultures." As she descended from the stage, she felt the gazes upon her, some admiring, others curious, some still skeptical. Calvin Winters observed her with a complex expression, a mixture of surprise, discomfort, and something that could be a spark of reluctant respect. The rest of the presentations proceeded, but something had changed in the environment. Whispered conversations arose in the corners of the room. Furtive glances were directed at the girl in a school uniform sitting quietly in her chair. The presenter tried to maintain the rhythm of the event, but it was evident that Isabel's demonstration had irrevocably altered the dynamics of that day. During the break, while the candidates and evaluators headed to the lobby for a coffee break, Isabel remained seated answering messages from her mother. "How did it go, honey?" asked Maria, anxious. "I think it went well, Mom," replied Isabel, unable to translate into words what had just happened. She didn't notice when the journalist approached, extending a card to her. "Isabel, my name is Rebecca Campos, from USA News Portal. I'd really like to talk with you when you have a moment." Before she could respond, the HR director appeared at her side. "Miss Parker, Mr. Winters would like to speak with you privately. Could you come with me, please?" Isabel nodded, putting the journalist's card in her pocket. As she followed the director through the mirrored corridors of Wintertech, she felt the weight of the moment. Something had begun there in that room, something that neither she nor Calvin Winters nor any other person present could predict or control. The door to the CEO's private office opened, revealing an even more impressive view of the city. Seated behind an imposing dark wood desk, Calvin Winters waited, fingers interlaced, his inscrutable gaze fixed on the girl who, unknowingly, had just shaken the foundations of his carefully constructed world. "Please sit, Miss Parker," said Calvin Winters, indicating the chair in front of his desk. His voice was controlled, professional, but his eyes studied Isabel as if she were a puzzle that needed to be deciphered. Isabel obeyed, feeling tiny in the leather chair that seemed to swallow her. Through the enormous windows, New York City stretched out like an ocean of concrete under the afternoon sky. "Your presentation was unusual," began Calvin, carefully choosing his words. "I confess I'm intrigued. I'm rarely surprised, Miss Parker, and today you accomplished that feat." "Thank you, sir," replied Isabel simply, uncertain if that was a compliment. Calvin stood up, walking to the window with his hands in the pockets of his impeccable jacket. "Our scholarship program was designed to identify and nurture exceptional talents," he continued. "Talents that, with the right resources, can transform the future of technology, business, the country." He turned to face her. "What do you intend to do with this linguistic ability of yours?" The question caught Isabel by surprise. In her boldest dreams, she imagined herself as a translator, a teacher, perhaps working in an international organization. But she had never considered that her talent could be seen as something truly valuable in the corporate world. "I would like to connect people," she replied honestly. "I believe languages are bridges. When I learn a language, I'm not just memorizing words, I'm creating connections with cultures, histories, people." Calvin arched an eyebrow, not expecting such an articulate answer. "Interesting. And how do you think this aligns with Wintertech's objectives? We are a technology company, not a translation agency. Technology also connects people, doesn't it?" Isabel surprised herself with her own boldness. "The best apps, the best systems are those that understand how people from different cultures think and communicate. At least that's what I think." An almost imperceptible smile formed on Calvin's lips. "I'll be direct, Miss Parker. Your ability is impressive, but our scholarship is usually directed to talents more applicable to our sector. However," he made a calculated pause, "we could consider an alternative proposal. A specialized program, perhaps. Something that highlights our corporate social responsibility." Isabel felt her stomach sink. Corporate social responsibility, the same words that the girl in the elevator had used, suggesting that Isabel didn't belong in the main program, but in some secondary charity initiative. "I understand," she said, keeping her voice firm despite the disappointment. "You don't believe my talent is relevant to your company." "I didn't say that," Calvin quickly corrected. "I said it's different from what we usually look for, more unusual." "Different like I am different from the other candidates?" asked Isabel, courage growing within her. "Because I come from a public school, because my mother is a cleaner." Calvin's expression hardened. "Don't put words in my mouth, Miss Parker. I'm offering an opportunity, not charity." "Thank you, Mr. Winters," replied Isabel, standing up, "but I prefer to compete for the regular program, like all the other candidates. If my talent isn't enough for that, then perhaps this isn't the place for me." Before Calvin could respond, a knock on the door interrupted the conversation. The HR director entered hurriedly, her face pale. "Mr. Winters, we need to talk now." Calvin frowned, irritated by the interruption, but something in the woman's expression made him nod. "Miss Parker, please wait outside. We haven't finished our conversation." Isabel went out into the corridor, where an unusual buzz was taking over the floor. Employees whispered among themselves, looking at cell phone and computer screens. A young assistant passed by her, recognized her, and widened his eyes. "It's you, the girl from the video." "What video?" asked Isabel, confused. The young man showed her his cell phone screen. It was a video of Isabel's presentation, beginning with her timidly climbing onto the stage and culminating with her confident response to Dr. Matthews' questions. The recording, clearly made by journalist Rebecca Campos, already had more than 50,000 views in less than an hour. The caption read, "Language genius. Girl from the South Bronx speaks 15 languages and leaves billionaire CEO speechless." Isabel felt the blood drain from her face. Her private moment of triumph had become a public spectacle, and from the tone of the comments that grew with each second, it was rapidly transforming into something bigger than herself. "Calvin Winters found someone he can't buy," said one comment. "This girl deserves more than a scholarship. She deserves a company," said another. "The face of true meritocracy that the rich preach so much but rarely practice," commented a third. Inside the office, Calvin Winters watched the same video on his screen, his face contorted in an expression of controlled fury. "How did this leak?" he demanded to know. "The journalist from USA News Portal," explained the HR director nervously. "Apparently she live-streamed to her editors via cell phone. The video was published minutes after the presentation. It's everywhere now. Twitter, Facebook, YouTube. The major portals are already picking it up. And why the hell was a journalist filming? I thought the press was here just for an institutional note. She had authorization to photograph the event for the print article," justified the director. "We didn't imagine she would do a live broadcast." Calvin ran his hands through his perfectly aligned hair, a rare demonstration of loss of control. "The problem isn't the video itself," continued the director. "It's how it's being framed. Social media is painting this as the genius from the outskirts versus the arrogant CEO. Your question about how she learned the languages is being interpreted as elitist skepticism." "Ridiculous," growled Calvin. "I just questioned something improbable. Any sensible person would do the same." "Yes, sir, but the narrative is already forming, and her story, self-taught, cleaner mother, public library, is resonating with the public. We need a strategy to manage this." Meanwhile, in the corridor, Isabel's cell phone wouldn't stop vibrating. Messages from her mother, from Mrs. Robinson, from Hakeem and other teachers from the NGO, all had seen the video. And most surprisingly, a flood of friend requests, messages from strangers, interview requests. "Isabel!" Rebecca Campos's voice made her turn. The journalist was approaching quickly. "We need to talk. Your video is exploding on the internet. People want to know more about you, your story, how you learned so many languages." "I didn't want this," murmured Isabel, feeling overwhelmed. "I just came to participate in the selection." "I understand, but it's already happened. And your story is important, Isabel. It represents something that many people need to hear, that talent and determination can flourish anywhere, even without resources." Before Isabel could respond, the door to Calvin's office opened. The CEO emerged, accompanied by the HR director, and a man she recognized as the company's communications director. "Miss Parker," said Calvin, his tone artificially cordial. "It seems you've become a celebrity. I'd like to invite you to a press conference. Wintertech is pleased to announce that you are one of the winners of our scholarship program." Isabel looked at him, surprised by the sudden change. "But the evaluation process isn't over. The other candidates, exceptional cases deserve exceptional decisions," replied Calvin, the smile not reaching his eyes. "Your demonstration was so extraordinary that we decided to recognize you immediately." Rebecca Campos observed the scene with a critical eye, clearly perceiving the public relations maneuver. "And the scholarship?" asked the journalist directly. "Will it be in the regular program or in that alternative social responsibility program that you were considering?" Calvin's face stiffened for an instant before recomposing his corporate smile. "In the regular program, obviously. Miss Parker will receive exactly the same benefits as all our talented scholars." Isabel felt a wave of contradictory emotions. On one hand, she had achieved what she came to seek, a scholarship that would transform her educational opportunities. On the other, she knew that the decision didn't come from genuine recognition, but from an attempt to control the damage to the company's image and that of its CEO. "Can I think about it?" she asked, surprising everyone. Calvin blinked, clearly not expecting resistance. "Think? Miss Parker, we're offering a full scholarship to any school of your choice, personalized mentoring, international opportunities. What is there to think about?" "I'd like to discuss it with my mother," replied Isabel firmly. "This is an important decision for both of us." The silence that followed was broken by the ring of Isabel's cell phone. It was Maria, probably concerned about the whole situation unfolding online. "I need to answer my mother," said Isabel. "Can I give my answer tomorrow?" Calvin hesitated, visibly uncomfortable with the loss of control over the situation, but nodded. "Of course, tomorrow then." As Isabel moved away to answer the call, Calvin and his team returned to the office for a crisis meeting. The live broadcast had not only captured Isabel's linguistic demonstration, but also Calvin's reaction of surprise, then skepticism, and finally his questioning, a sequence that, on social media, was being interpreted as the personification of class prejudice disguised as meritocracy. In the building's reception, Isabel finally managed to talk to her mother. "Honey, what's happening? I'm getting messages from people I don't even know. Your video is everywhere." "I know, Mom. I don't really understand it either. It all happened so fast." Isabel summarized the events, her presentation, the audience's reaction, the conversation with Calvin, and finally the scholarship offer. "They offered you the scholarship? That's wonderful, honey," exclaimed Maria, her voice choked with emotion. "Yes, but—" Isabel hesitated. "I don't know if it was for the right reason. I think they only did it because of the video so they wouldn't seem prejudiced." A brief silence on the other end of the line. "Isabel, listen to your mother," Maria finally said, with the wisdom that only mothers possess. "It doesn't matter why they offered it. What matters is that you deserved it. I saw the video. Everyone saw what you're capable of. They may have offered it under pressure, but the ability you demonstrated is yours. No one can deny that." Isabel felt tears in her eyes. "And what if I accept, and then they treat me differently, like the poor girl they had to accept?" "Then you'll show them, day after day, why you deserve to be there," replied Maria firmly. "Like you did today." While talking with her mother, Isabel noticed a group of journalists entering the building's lobby, some already recognizing her and pointing in her direction. "Mom, I have to go. I think I'll have to give interviews." "Go, my daughter. Be yourself as you've always been. I'll be waiting at home." The next few hours passed like a whirlwind. Isabel answered questions from journalists, trying to maintain the calmness and sincerity that characterized her. She talked about her passion for languages, about the volunteer teachers from the NGO, about the long hours in the public library. Each answer, broadcast live and shared instantly, amplified the story that was already capturing national attention. On the 40th floor, Calvin Winters watched everything on his screen, surrounded by press advisors and concerned executives. What should have been just another day of selection for his scholarship program had transformed into a test for his leadership and for the values that his company claimed to represent. "The girl is good," commented one of the executives, observing Isabel answer questions in multiple languages for international journalists who were already beginning to cover the story. "Yes, she is," agreed Calvin, his eyes fixed on the screen. For a brief moment, behind the facade of the powerful CEO accustomed to controlling all situations, emerged a genuine expression of admiration. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give it a like. Tell us what city you're watching us from. We continue. 2 weeks had passed since the day of the interview at WinterTech. Isabel's video had already surpassed 20 million views, had been translated into dozens of languages, and generated a national debate about education, opportunities, and meritocracy. Television programs, podcasts, and newspapers competed for interviews with the polyglot from the Bronx, as Isabel had been nicknamed. The Parker family's routine had completely transformed. Journalists camped near the modest apartment in the South Bronx. Curious people appeared at the local library, wanting to know the place where the genius was formed. And the Open Borders NGO suddenly found itself flooded with donations and volunteering offers. For Isabel, however, the most significant moment had been the decision about the WinterTech scholarship. After long conversations with her mother, she had decided to accept the opportunity, but with one non-negotiable condition: WinterTech should create a permanent scholarship program specifically for public school students, focusing on self-taught talents in various areas. To her surprise, Calvin Winters not only accepted the condition, but personally announced the creation of the Horizons program during a press conference, with Isabel at his side. On stage, the CEO seemed genuinely enthusiastic about the initiative, although attentive observers might notice that his smile still didn't completely reach his eyes. On that Wednesday morning, 2 weeks after the event that had changed her life, Isabel was preparing for her first day at the prestigious Manhattan International Academy, one of the most renowned educational institutions in North America, attended by the children of the business and diplomatic elite of the country. "Are you nervous?" asked Maria, adjusting the navy blue blazer of the uniform that WinterTech had provided. "A little," admitted Isabel. "It's strange. I spoke to millions of people on the internet, gave interviews in various languages, but the idea of entering that school, it's different," completed Maria, understanding. "There you won't be a passing celebrity. You'll be someone trying to fit in, make friends, belong." Isabel nodded, grateful for her mother's understanding. "I promise I'll work hard to make this opportunity worth it, Mum." Maria held her daughter's face between her hands. "You already make it worth it, just by being who you are, my daughter." The driver sent by WinterTech arrived punctually. Part of the scholarship package included daily transportation to school, something that Calvin had personally insisted on ensuring when he learned that Isabel would take almost 2 hours of public transportation to reach the institution. Upon arriving at the imposing modern architecture building, with extensive gardens and facilities that looked more like an elite university campus than a school, Isabel felt her stomach tighten. Students arrived in luxury cars, talking about international trips and the latest technological trends. Several recognized her immediately, pointing and whispering. At the secretary's office, she was received by the principal, Dr. Elisa Morgan, an elegant middle-aged woman who treated her with cautious cordiality. "Miss Parker, welcome to Manhattan International Academy. We are honored to receive you," she said, the pauses revealing more than the words. "I must say that your admission is quite unusual. Our students usually go through a rigorous selection process, and we rarely accept transfers in the middle of the school year." "I understand, Dr. Morgan. I appreciate the opportunity and promise to work hard to keep up with the class pace." The principal smiled, a little more relaxed. "Well, from what we've seen, keeping pace won't be your problem. In fact, we've created an adapted program for you. With your permission, we'd like to conduct some assessments to determine your current level in each subject." The first weeks at the new school were a challenge different from anything Isabel had ever faced. Academically, she shined. Her linguistic abilities impressed even the most skeptical teachers, and her dedication to studies quickly placed her among the best students in practically all subjects. Socially, however, the path was more difficult. Some classmates treated her like a celebrity, others with veiled distrust, and still others with an almost anthropological curiosity, as if she were a rare specimen from a world completely different from theirs. During this period, while Isabel struggled to find her place in the new environment, something unexpected began to happen behind the scenes. Questions about the authenticity of her abilities emerged on social media and in some press vehicles. Articles with titles like "The Truth Behind the Isabel Parker Phenomenon" and "Polyglot or Fraud." Experts' raised doubts began to circulate. The accusations ranged from insinuations that she had merely memorized phrases to impress, to conspiracy theories that it was all an elaborate marketing campaign by WinterTech. The pressure increased when a well-known linguist, Dr. Alan Sanders, published an analysis questioning the depth of Isabel's knowledge in some of the languages she claimed to master. "It is statistically improbable that a teenager without financial resources for formal education could acquire genuine fluency in so many languages," he wrote. "Perhaps we are facing a case of performative skills, not true linguistic mastery." When these criticisms reached Isabel, she felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath her feet. One thing was to face Calvin Winters' initial skepticism. It had been a private moment, later transformed into public. Something completely different was to have her integrity and capacity questioned publicly by experts, calling into question not just her abilities, but her character. "I don't understand, Mum," she confided one night in tears. "Why are they doing this? I never lied about what I know or how I learned. Maria hugged her daughter, her heart breaking at seeing Isabel's suffering. Some people can't accept that someone like us can stand out without having the same opportunities they had, she said softly. Others simply love to bring down those who are rising, and some perhaps have interests that we don't know about. At WinterTech, Calvin Winters followed the situation with growing interest. Initially, he confessed only to himself. He had felt a certain relief seeing questions arise about Isabel's abilities. If she were exposed as a fraud, or even as someone with talents exaggerated by the media, his initial reaction of skepticism would be retroactively justified. However, as he observed the unfolding of events and mainly the way Isabel dealt with the pressure, something began to change within him. The girl didn't defend herself by attacking her critics, didn't seek additional spotlights, didn't transform the situation into a battle of egos. Instead, she continued studying, learning, demonstrating a resilience that Calvin, raised in a bubble of privilege, found difficult to understand. The situation reached its peak when Dr. Alan Sanders, the linguist who had publicly questioned Isabel's abilities, proposed a challenge, an open test broadcast live, where Isabel would be evaluated by a panel of specialists in each of the languages she claimed to master. The proposal quickly gained traction. Many saw it as the perfect opportunity for Isabel to prove her talent once and for all, while others considered it a cruel trap for a teenager already under immense public pressure. When the news reached Isabel, she was in the library of her new school, studying for a physics test. Her first reaction was panic. The idea of being tested like a circus phenomenon, with millions watching, was terrifying. But after a few hours of reflection, something changed in her perspective. "I'm going to accept the challenge," she announced to her mother that night. "Are you sure, honey?" asked Maria, concerned. "You don't need to prove anything to anyone." "I need to prove it to myself, Mom, and to all the other kids like me, who study in public libraries, who dream of opportunities. If I refuse, they'll say I have something to hide." The next day, Isabel requested a meeting with Calvin Winters. To her surprise, the CEO received her immediately in his office. "I want to accept Dr. Sanders's challenge," she said, without beating around the bush, "but with some conditions." Calvin raised his eyebrows, not hiding his surprise. "You don't need to do this, Isabel. WinterTech supports you unconditionally." The words sounded rehearsed, part of a carefully constructed corporate speech. "Yes, I do," replied Isabel, with a serenity that didn't match her 13 years. "And I want WinterTech to organize the event. With these conditions, the panel of evaluators must include teachers from the Open Borders NGO, immigrants and refugees who master their native languages. The test must include not just grammar and vocabulary, but deep cultural knowledge. And for each language in which I pass, WinterTech will donate educational materials to 10 public libraries." Calvin observed the girl in front of him with a new look. She was no longer the timid girl in a school uniform who had climbed onto the stage weeks ago. There was a quiet strength in her, a determination that came not from arrogance, but from a deep conviction in her own worth and in what she represented. "Deal," he said, extending his hand. "WinterTech will organize the event exactly as you requested." The news of the challenge accepted by Isabel spread quickly. Date and place were set, 2 weeks from then in the main auditorium of New York University, with live broadcast to the entire country. The panel would be composed of 15 specialists, one for each language that Isabel claimed to master, including university professors, professional translators, and natives indicated by the Open Borders NGO. Dr. Sanders, who hadn't expected his challenge to be accepted, much less on these terms, found himself obliged to participate. In interviews, he tried to maintain his skeptical tone, but seemed increasingly uncomfortable with the dimension the event was taking. As the day of the test approached, Isabel divided her time between classes at her new school, where she was slowly beginning to make true friendships and preparation for the challenge. It wasn't about studying new content, it was too late for that, but reviewing what she already knew and mainly mentally preparing for the pressure. Calvin Winters, for his part, became increasingly personally involved in organizing the event. What had begun as a public relations strategy for his company was gradually transforming into something more personal, more significant. In meetings with his team, he no longer talked about managing the situation or controlling the narrative, but about ensuring that the truth prevails and creating a historic educational moment. On the eve of the big day, Isabel received an unexpected visit at her home in the South Bronx. Calvin Winters, without his usual escort of advisors and security guards, knocked on the door of the modest apartment where she lived with her mother. "I hope I'm not interrupting," he said, visibly displaced in that environment so different from his usual circles. "What are you doing here, Mr. Winters?" asked Maria, surprised and a little suspicious. "I came to speak with Isabel, if you'll allow me." Invited in, Calvin sat in the small living room, looking with genuine interest at the improvised shelves full of books, many of them visibly used and worn by time. "Isabel," he began, with a sincerity that surprised even himself, "I came to say that, regardless of what happens tomorrow, you've already won. And I've learned more from you in these weeks than in many years as CEO." The auditorium of New York University was full long before the scheduled time for the start of the event. 3,000 people occupied every available seat, while millions watched via live broadcast on the internet and television. On stage, 15 tables had been arranged in a semicircle, each occupied by a specialist in the language they would evaluate. Backstage, Isabel breathed deeply, trying to control her nervousness. She wore a simple white shirt and jeans, a deliberate choice to remain true to who she was, without trying to impress anyone with appearances. At her side, Maria held her hand tightly. "Remember, honey, you've already won just by being here," whispered her mother. Mrs. Robinson, the librarian who first noticed Isabel's exceptional talent, was also present, along with Hakeem and other volunteer teachers from the Open Borders NGO. They formed a small army of support, people who had believed in Isabel long before the spotlights. A few meters away, in a reserved room, Calvin Winters adjusted his tie for the third time, strangely nervous. In the last few weeks, something had changed in him, a subtle but profound transformation that even he didn't completely understand. "Everything is ready, sir," informed his assistant. "National and international press, broadcast in more than 50 countries. It's probably the largest educational event ever held in America." Calvin nodded, thoughtful. "And the girl? How is she?" "Surprisingly calm, considering the pressure," replied the assistant. "She always surprises us, doesn't she?" commented Calvin, more to himself than to his assistant. At 10 o'clock sharp, the event began. A moderator explained the rules. Isabel would be tested in each of the 15 languages she claimed to master. Each evaluation would last 20 minutes and would include conversation, textual comprehension, cultural knowledge, and simultaneous translation capability. The evaluators would assign scores from 1 to 10, with 7 being the minimum to consider that there was real mastery of the language. Dr. Sanders, the linguist who had publicly challenged Isabel, occupied a prominent place as general supervisor of the evaluations. His tense face revealed that he was beginning to perceive the magnitude of what he had initiated and possibly to question his own motivations. When Isabel entered the stage, the auditorium erupted in applause. She smiled timidly, waving to the audience before taking her place in the central chair. "Ready to begin, Miss Parker?" asked the moderator. Isabel nodded, her eyes revealing determination behind the nervousness. The first evaluation, in English, proceeded without surprises. Isabel conversed fluently about American literature, translated a complex excerpt from a political speech, and discussed cultural nuances that surprised even the evaluator, an American professor with 30 years of experience. "Score 9.5, he announced at the end. "Exceptional mastery for a non-native, especially a teenager." The following evaluations, French, Spanish, Italian, and German, followed a similar pattern. Isabel not only demonstrated technical knowledge of the languages, but a deep understanding of their cultural nuances, regional slang, and idiomatic expressions that only a truly passionate study could provide. The audience watched, hypnotized. In the university corridors, students gathered around screens that broadcast the event. On social media, the hashtag #OnIsabelPolyglot became the most commented topic globally. The test in Mandarin was particularly impressive. The evaluator, a Chinese diplomat with little patience for showmanship, began with basic questions, then moved to intermediate ones, and finally to complex discussions about ancient Chinese philosophy. With each correct answer from Isabel, His serious countenance gave way to growing surprise. In 20 years evaluating foreign students of Mandarin, I've never seen such a deep understanding in someone so young and with so little study time, he declared at the end, assigning a score of 9. Dr. Sanders observed with an increasingly uncomfortable expression. What he had imagined would be an opportunity to unmask a media exaggeration was transforming into the opposite, the public confirmation of a genuinely extraordinary talent. In the 10th evaluation, Arabic, a particularly moving moment occurred. The official evaluator was a university professor, but beside him sat Hakim, the Syrian refugee who had taught Isabel at the NGO. When she began to answer the questions, she didn't just use standard Arabic, but included expressions from the specific dialect of the Damascus region where Hakim came from. The man's eyes welled up. "You remember everything I taught you," he said in Arabic. "Each word carries the history of who teaches it," replied Isabel in the same language, quoting a proverb that he himself had taught her. That moment captured the essence of what made Isabel special. It wasn't just her technical ability to absorb languages, but the deep human connection she established through them. Each language was a bridge to a culture, a history, a heart. After 4 hours of intense evaluations, the moment for the final result arrived. The moderator took the stage where Isabel waited, exhausted but serene. "Miss Isabel Parker," he announced, "it is with immense satisfaction that we inform you, you have passed in all 15 evaluated languages, with an average score of 9.2, classified by the specialists as exceptional mastery." The auditorium exploded in applause. Maria ran to the stage to hug her daughter, both in tears. Mrs. Robinson, Hakim, and Isabel's other mentors joined them, forming a circle of celebration that represented the true meaning of that victory. Not of just one person, but of an entire community. Dr. Sanders approached the microphone, his face grave. "As a scientist," he began, "my job is to question, test hypotheses, seek evidence. Today we witnessed something that defies statistical probabilities. A young woman who, without financial resources or formal education in languages, reached a level that many with all privileges will never reach." He paused, visibly moved. "Isabel Parker forces us to rethink our premises about talent, opportunity, and human potential. I owe you my sincere apologies and my profound admiration." Calvin Winters, who had watched everything from the first row, stood up and walked to the stage. The auditorium fell silent, curious to hear what the powerful CEO would say. "When I met Isabel Parker," he began, "I made the mistake that many of us privileged make daily. I judged her potential by her origin, not by her real merit." His voice, usually confident in corporate presentations, trembled slightly. "Today, WinterTech not only fulfills the promise to donate educational materials to public libraries for each language in which Isabel was approved, which means 150 libraries benefited, but announces the creation of the Open Horizons Foundation with an initial investment of $50 million. A murmur of surprise ran through the auditorium, Calvin continued. "This foundation will identify and support extraordinary talents in low-income communities throughout America, with a special focus on self-taught individuals like Isabel, because today we learned that true human potential is distributed equally throughout the population, but opportunities are not." He looked directly at Isabel before concluding, "And the first president of the Youth Advisory Board of this foundation, if she accepts, will be Isabel Parker." At that moment, something rare happened. Calvin Winters' smile, for the first time since Isabel had met him, reached his eyes. In the months that followed, Isabel's story continued to reverberate and generate transformations. WinterTech's scholarship program expanded, including specific categories for self-taught talents. The Open Borders NGO received funding to open branches in other cities. Public libraries throughout the country registered a significant increase in attendance, especially in the language section. Isabel continued her studies at Manhattan International Academy, where she had finally found her place, not as a celebrity, but as a student respected for her genuine merit. Her mornings were dedicated to the regular curriculum, the afternoons to projects of the Open Horizons Foundation, where she helped to identify and guide other young talents from backgrounds similar to hers. Maria Parker, at her daughter's insistence, accepted a scholarship to complete high school and begin a college degree in education, a dream she had abandoned at 17 when she became pregnant with Isabel. The most surprising transformation, however, occurred in Calvin Winters. The CEO who had built his empire on the belief that excellence and privilege necessarily walked together became a vocal advocate for the democratization of educational opportunities. In lectures and interviews, he frequently cited Isabel as the person who taught me that our system wastes geniuses every day simply because they are born at the wrong address. On a Saturday afternoon, 6 months after the famous test, Isabel was participating in an event at the old public library where it all began. The place was unrecognizable. Renovated with resources from the Open Horizons Foundation, it now had modern computers, a multilingual media library, and comfortable spaces for study. While talking with local children about the importance of reading and self-teaching, she noticed a little girl of approximately 8 years, with colorful braids and curious eyes, who was leafing through a book of introduction to French. "Do you like languages?" asked Isabel, bending down to be at the girl's height. "Yes," she replied shyly. "I want to learn all of them, like you. What's your name?" "Gabriella. But everyone calls me Gabby." "You know, Gabby, I learned something important in my journey," said Isabel, smiling. "The true power of languages isn't in how many you speak, but in the connections you create through them. Each new word is a bridge to someone you haven't met yet." Gabby nodded, her eyes shining with that same insatiable curiosity that Isabel recognized so well, the seed of a talent waiting for the opportunity to flourish. Standing near the entrance of the library, Calvin Winters observed the scene with a genuine smile. At his side, Maria Parker, now coordinator of the Foundation's Reading Incentive Program, organized materials for the workshop she would conduct next. "She has a natural gift for inspiring others," commented Calvin, observing Isabel with little Gabby. "She always has," replied Maria with maternal pride, "but she needed someone to see that gift." "And I almost didn't see it," admitted Calvin, with an honesty that still surprised him. "I almost let my prejudices blind me to something extraordinary." "The important thing is that you did see it in the end," said Maria softly. "And now together, we're helping others to see talents where before they only saw limitations." At that moment, as Isabel helped Gabby pronounce her first words in French, a silent certainty hung in the air. The true transformation wasn't just in the life of an exceptional girl, but in how her story had changed everyone's perception around her about potential, opportunity, and the true nature of human excellence. Isabel's talent with languages was just the beginning. The true gift she brought to the world was the ability to build bridges between cultures, between social classes, between worlds that seemed irremediably separated. And these bridges, built word by word, story by story, would continue to echo far beyond that library, that city, that moment. In a discreet corner of the library, a newly installed plaque displayed a quote personally chosen by Isabel. "Knowledge is the only treasure that multiplies when it is shared." Below, in smaller letters, a simple signature: "For all self-taught dreamers, your voices matter."